Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're going to be talking about Henry Light Horse Harry Lee. Now, Henry Lee was a part of the Virginia Lee dynasty. He had cousins who were more famous than him, Richard Henry Lee being the most famous, and Francis Lightfoot Lee, both signed the Declaration of Independence. Their brothers, William and Arthur Lee, were already in Europe when the war started and acted as important diplomats for the Americans during the Revolution. But Henry Light Horse Harry Lee was just 20 years old when he joined the Continental Army. And he was very quickly, probably due to family relations, he was very quickly appointed to lead the Virginia Dragoons. Now, as I understand it, Dragoons traditionally were a horseback unit they'd ride to battle and then dismount and fight on foot. Now, this was a time in the 18th century where things were changing and cavalry was becoming more popular. So they would, from time to time, stay on horseback and fight from atop their steed, if you will. So, Light Horse Harry Lee did a very good job of distinguishing himself, and he participated in dozens of battles and skirmishes throughout the Revolution, mostly in the southern department, including the Battle of Yorktown, which he was at. However, his most famous battle was the Battle of Paulus Hook. I believe it's pronounced Paulus or Paulus Hook, which is in New Jersey. It was a surprise nighttime raid on the British. And they forded a river and took them by surprise, and it was an astounding defeat for the British because Lee took over 100 British prisoners and lost less than 10 men doing so. It was extraordinarily lopsided. And the Continental Congress recognized this, and they gave Henry Light Horse Harry Lee a gold medal for his work in that battle. And Lee was the only person during the American Revolutionary War who received a gold medal from Congress and did not also become a general. It just shows how great he was at leading his men. Lee would serve, as I said, through Yorktown till the end of the war, resign himself back to his home in Virginia, but he was sent as a delegate to the Continental Congress. And he spent 2 years there. It was just before the Constitutional Convention when the Continental Congress didn't get much done, except the Northwest Ordinance, of course. And then Lee was sent as a delegate to the Virginia Ratification Convention, where he voted for the Constitution. Virginia, of course, a very important battleground during the ratification debates. And Lee supported it, and Lee voted for the Constitution. He was shortly thereafter elected as governor of Virginia, which, as the biggest and strongest and most powerful state in the young Union, governor of Virginia was one of the most powerful positions you could have in North America. And he had it for 3 years, which was the maximum they were allowed to carry that position. And then shortly after he retired, he was tapped by George Washington, who said, "Hey, we're having some problems in western Pennsylvania. We made this tax on whiskey, and these people don't want to pay." And this, of course, became the Whiskey Rebellion, which famously, George Washington is the only president to ever lead soldiers into battle. And that was during the Whiskey Rebellion, while they were suppressing these people in western Pennsylvania who didn't want to pay tax on their whiskey. Now, I hate to break this to you, but George Washington, while he did go with the soldiers, he was mostly for show, to show his support and to show the strength of the army and that it's to be obeyed. Excuse me. But the truth of the matter is, he had Henry Light Horse Harry Lee actually command the army during this event. So, command of the 13,000 or so soldiers was given to Light Horse Harry Lee, who, when he arrived with the army, did nothing because the the people in Pennsylvania were told, hey, the army's coming, you need to stop this, and things were resolved. But it wasn't until right before Light Horse Harry Lee showed up with the army and George Washington in the back that they did. So Lee, again, goes home, and then he eventually, during the quasi-war with France, once John Adams becomes president, say 8 years later or so, Light Horse Harry is given the position of Major General in the United States Army. Forgive me. And he never saw any action because it was a quasi-war, and the little bit of fighting that went on was done at sea. But he still received this extraordinarily important position. After the Washington and Adams administrations, Light Horse Harry Lee was elected to the United States House of Representatives for Virginia, which he did for 2 years. And then he retired. And he stayed home. And then he is involved in the Baltimore riots. So, the War of 1812 breaks out, and some people are against it. And Henry Light Horse Harry Lee was one of these people who was against fighting in this war. And he had a friend who owned a printing press in Baltimore that was printing propaganda that said, let's not fight in this war. And Light Horse was there visiting him when a bunch of local Baltimore citizens stormed the printing press to burn it down. And Light Horse Harry tried to defend his friend and say, no, like, we want free papers. This is what Jefferson and your buddy Madison, who's president right now, kept saying, free papers, right? Free newspapers. And the people didn't want any of that. And they actually took them outside and beat them severely. And at this point, 40 years gone by, he's approaching 60. He's not necessarily a young man anymore. And he was beaten so severely that his injuries never fully healed. And it sounds like he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from this. Now, that wasn't a disease that they spoke about at the time. It's not that it's a new disease, but, we didn't call it anything until World War I, when we started talking about shell shock. Nowadays, I say post-traumatic, PTSD. You hear it, you know what I mean. But back then, it wasn't really a thing. So he suffered through it quietly, more or less. And unfortunately, his life ends with that. He does go to the West Indies to try and recuperate, which, as I've said before, was usually the doctor's orders for many things. They weren't doing bloodletting so much anymore. Instead, it was, go to the West Indies. That'll heal you. And while his ship was returning to the United States, he passed away on the ship. So he was not actually in the country he helped create when he passed away. They did finish the trip and bury him here, of course, but that's that. Now, I do want to end with Light Horse Harry Lee's son, who is actually way more famous than he is, and one of his sons' names was Robert E. Lee. That's a name most history buffs will know, even those of us who don't study the Civil War all so much. Robert E. Lee, of course, was the commander-in-chief of the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Now, I know he didn't win that war, and we all live in the United States now, but either way, Robert E. Lee was an extraordinarily important member of American history. And I like to bring it up to remind people that the Civil War and the American Revolution, it's easy to get lost and say, this was here and this was here. But the Civil War was quite literally the sons and grandsons of the founders fighting each other. And the story of Henry Lightfoot Harry Lee, who fought in the Continental Army and was at a ratifying convention and in the Continental Congress and at the Whiskey Rebellion and a victim of the War of 1812, was most certainly a founder. And it was his son who led one of the armies of the Civil War. Now, again, I'm not going to get into Robert E. Lee and the Civil War. That's not for me to debate here. But on Friday, it's a little bit long, but in 10 minutes, that's the life of Light Horse Harry Lee, who is one of many, many, many underappreciated founders who we really need to celebrate. Well, that's why I made this video, and that's why you watched, and I really appreciate that you did. If you like this video, please hit like. If you haven't, please subscribe so you can get my 5-day-a-week videos. I might be one short next week. There's a little holiday named Christmas next week, so I might not shoot a video on Christmas. Sorry. But if you want to, watch back at some of my old videos you might have missed. And I'm just redoing my Patreon page. I'm about to put a poll on there to decide what I should call my patrons. So if you're interested in becoming involved in that, please let me know. And check out the link below in the description. Again, I'm Jason, and thank you so much for watching.